This is a story about a man named Stanley. Stanley worked for a company in a big building where he was employee #427. Employee #427's job was simple. He sat at his desk in room 427 and he pushed buttons on a keyboard. Orders came to him through a monitor on his desk telling him what buttons to push, how long to push them, and in what order. This is what employee #427 did every day of every month of every year, and although others may have considered it soul-rending, Stanley relished every moment that the orders came in, as though he had been made exactly for this job. And Stanley was happy. And then one day, something very peculiar happened. Something that would forever change Stanley. Something he would never quite forget. He had been at his desk for nearly an hour when he had realized not one single order had arrived on the monitor for him to follow. No one had shown up to give him instructions, call a meeting, or even say hi. Never in all his years at the company had this happened, this complete isolation. Something was very clearly wrong. Shocked, frozen solid, Stanley found himself unable to move for the longest time. But as he came to his wits and regained his senses, he got up from his desk and stepped out of his office. He walked down the hallways of the building until he came to the lobby where he saw several people sitting around in a circle. They were staring into their hands and whispering to each other. One of them turned to him. "Oh," said the person, "you're new." Stanley nodded, his face still blank. "Come here often?" asked the person. "I don't know," said Stanley. "We've been waiting for you," said the person. Stanley looked at the people in the circle and noticed they all seemed to be holding some sort of device. "What are those?" asked Stanley. "You know, it's hard to explain," said the person. "They are really great devices, but I can't seem to put my finger on what they do exactly. It's like they are a part of us, you know? And we're a part of them." "I don't understand," said Stanley. The person laughed. "Come on, don't you have one?" asked the person. Stanley shook his head. "Don't you want to?" asked the person. "No," said Stanley. "Oh, come on," said the person. "I bet you'd love one. Don't you want to know what's going on around you? Don't you want to feel connected to the world?" "No," said Stanley. "You must be new," said the person. "This is so much more than just a device. This is a gateway to a whole new way of living. Come on, just try it." "I don't think I'll be needing one," said Stanley. "Okay, well, we'll see you around," said the person. And with that, the person stepped back into the circle and joined the others who were looking at their hands. Stanley turned to leave. He had been through this before. He knew he would have to wait for an order or some sort of explanation, but he didn't know how long it would take. He walked down the hallways until he reached the elevator. He pressed the button and waited as the elevator made its slow ascent up to the second floor. As he stepped out of the elevator, he was startled by a voice behind him. "Excuse me, sir," said the voice. "Could you please sign this?" Stanley turned to see a man holding a clipboard. "I'm sorry," asked Stanley. "This is just a formality," said the man. "You see, we're about to open the doors. We need to make sure everyone is accounted for." "Why?" asked Stanley. "You see, we've been waiting for you," said the man. "We can't let anyone else in until you're here. So please, just sign right here." Stanley looked at the clipboard. On it was a sheet of paper with his name written on it. "I don't understand," said Stanley. "It's quite simple," said the man. Just sign your name. You won't regret it. Stanley stared at the clipboard, and then he looked at the man. I don't know what you're talking about, said Stanley. The man smiled. Come on, don't you want to be a part of something special? Asked the man. Stanley shook his head. Okay, well, we'll see you later then, said the man. And with that, the man stepped into the elevator and pressed the button to go up to the second floor. Stanley stared at the elevator door and thought about what had just happened. He didn't know how long he had been standing there, but when he finally snapped out of it, the elevator was already at the second floor. He stepped out and saw a crowd of people gathered in front of the doors. There were about 3 dozen of them, all with their eyes closed and looking up at the ceiling. As Stanley approached, he could tell something was wrong. His first instinct was that one of the people had fallen down or fainted, but when he got closer, he could see that most of the people seemed perfectly normal except for one thing: they were all frozen. One person in particular was holding an umbrella, as though he was about to walk into the rain. Stanley stepped into the group of people. Hello, said Stanley. There was no response. Stanley looked around him, trying to figure out why the people had stopped moving. He took his eyes off the frozen people to see if he could locate any signs of what caused them to stop. But before he could see anything, another voice startled him from behind. Excuse me, said a woman's voice. Stanley turned around. Standing there was a girl about 6 or 7 years old, staring up at Stanley with her big blue eyes. He immediately felt embarrassed at what he was seeing, but the woman beside her told Stanley to stay calm. The girl's mother smiled, revealing a set of silver braces on either side of her front teeth. Hi, she said. What did you say your name was? My name is Stanley, said Stanley. How about you? I'm Julie, and this is my brother Tom. Stanley held his hand out, shaking Julie's hand gently. She looked at her mother with curious eyes as she gripped onto her hand with both of hers. We don't know each other, but my friends here have been expecting us. Stanley looked down towards where everyone else was standing. The entire group of people were still in midair with their arms folded across their chests and their eyes shut tightly, like someone had pressed a pause button on their life. But as the minutes went by, he started feeling worried because none of the people would move. And then one of them let out an audible gasp that startled them all. And after another 30 minutes, a couple of them started to sweat. After an hour had passed, it seemed to be taking longer and longer for anyone to react, but eventually it happened. Everyone moved in sync. The people who didn't move, such as Tom or Julie, began shaking, and those who already had moved suddenly sat back down. A few of them opened their eyes as they stood again. Then they all sat down, and within the next 2 hours, everyone finally got into formation. And that's when a man came over the sound system. His voice was amplified as he addressed everyone. Hello, friends. I know this may be difficult for some of you, but please do not fight amongst yourselves or leave without me. As you've been made aware already, there are only about 21,000 of us in all. That's a very limited amount, but together, I believe we'll do just fine. Please follow any instruction given to you by my staff until the event is over. That will make it much easier on yourself. You'll all find it difficult getting accustomed to your new home for the next 250 years. Stanley was trying to listen carefully as he watched the people, but all the time, he wondered who this man could be and how long the man had planned to do what was happening right now. But the answer soon became obvious to Stanley as he walked past one of the frozen end-time people and found himself walking into a small office that looked nothing more than ordinary, and ordinary at that. The walls were a dark shade of green. The room smelled slightly like a mixture between coffee beans and lavender, and as Stanley turned around on his heel to face the window to find something different to stare at, there was a bookcase that lined up along the entire wall behind it with dozens upon dozens of books neatly organized into different stacks, some fiction, some non-fiction, and a handful that he had no idea where to place them, such as the history books or philosophy ones. The book on the shelf beside him caught his eye. Stanley was surprised to see the Bible there because he wasn't sure whether someone actually owned that kind of stuff anymore or not. Stanley was about to pick it off the shelf, when a loud cough brought his attention back towards the door leading into the other portion of the room. He saw a young, well-dressed boy with an earpiece walk into the office, followed by a middle-aged man wearing a three-piece suit, all in black, from head to toe, even though this time of night, and the most striking thing about him was that the suit didn't cover anything, which made it obvious as to what his intentions really were. And as they passed by, Tom and Julie's father, the president of the country, said, "We have some new arrivals, so let's go introduce ourselves before exiting the office," without giving another moment thought to Stanley. The two newcomers entered behind him but were stopped as the president's personal secretary, his aide, really, stepped out ahead of him and told them, "The president has already been made aware. We must follow the protocol." They waited quietly as they watched Stanley approach, and when Stanley arrived before the president and his two assistants, the secretary of the cabinet whispered to him, "You are Mr. Stanley, right?" It was clear from what he'd heard before he got to them that Stanley had been informed that he was in fact the only person from Earth that had been left alive. So instead of answering, he simply nodded. The secretary then turned his attention to the president. "Good evening, Sir Richard," he began politely. "It's good to finally meet you after hearing what you've been talking about all this time." Stanley nodded in response. The two men were standing face to face. There was no reason why these two shouldn't get along. The secretary's hair was jet black, with just a thin silver streak at the top. He was in excellent shape, very well groomed and clean looking as well. Richard stood slightly taller and slimmer in stature with lighter eyes. He also had several facial features that gave him an Asian flair, a strong nose and small lips, but he had very thick black hair and seemed to take great pride in dressing himself up every morning for work, so his clothing would remain fresh and crisp no matter how many hours he put in each day. The secretary cleared his throat, which reminded Stanley that he was in fact waiting for a response from the man on top. But he waited anyway, not really sure what Richard was expecting or what was supposed to follow as they stared one another down in silence. But Richard spoke up first. "It's so nice meeting someone like you again. I'm glad you're here." Stanley wasn't quite sure what to make of that statement. He didn't know what to say either. So instead, he simply nodded in agreement. "I'm glad you're here too," Stanley replied. "And I hope you'll be able to help me get used to my new home." Richard smiled. It was a genuine smile. A smile that Stanley had never seen before. But it was a smile that made him feel warm inside. And he could tell that Richard was genuinely happy to see him. "You can count on it, Mr. Stanley," Richard said. "Now, if you don't mind, we have some other people to meet." The secretary then stepped forward and told the president, "We will leave you to your business, Sir Richard. We'll be back in a few minutes." He then turned around and walked out of the room, followed by the two men who had accompanied him. The president then turned to face Stanley. "Mr. Stanley, I'd like to introduce you to my son, Richard, and my daughter, Julie." Stanley looked at the president's son. He was handsome, but not as handsome as his father. His eyes were dark brown, almost black, and he had a very strong jawline with a slightly receding hairline. He seemed to be about 25 years old, but he had a much younger look to him. "Hello, Mr. Stanley," Richard said. "It's nice to finally meet you." "Nice to meet you too," Stanley replied. Richard then turned to his mother. "Mom, this is Stanley." Julie smiled. She was a beautiful woman with long blonde hair and a thin frame. Her skin was light brown, and she was dressed in a very modest, yet elegant dress. She had a soft voice, and when she spoke, it was clear that her words were sincere. "It's nice to meet you too," Julie said. "I've heard a lot about you from my father." Stanley nodded politely. He wasn't sure what to say next. So instead, he simply waited for them to finish introducing themselves before he responded. "It's nice meeting you both," Stanley said. "I'm glad to be here." "And I'm glad you're here," Richard said. "I know this must be a difficult time for you, so I hope you'll be able to get settled in soon." At that instant he pulled Stanley close enough, leaning all the way around to meet the younger man, and all along their arms hung close enough like a twisted snake trying desperately to stretch towards one another until they ran straight into each other, face, nose and all. Everything after would remain exactly how it was through that specific sequence, for them here anyways. Between sweaty palms and half-heartedly holding back sneezes, Stanley kept hanging around desperately thinking, rapidly putting on some eye-shading thoughts when a voice right about there could make changes. Later Stanley went slightly defensive as one then waved with a smug tongue which echoed sound after whispering sultrily deeper, as in which manner everything above could hide, before sighing hopelessly, before rising into breathlessness, mixed voices so at small manner between their teeth kissing. Slowly ever-growing fangs swallowing as throat caressed tongue, every waking soft step softly pressing feet as long lips grew. Wet hot open mouths meeting up, still hidden sweet gently swelling, making motions tilted a point, moving light touching bodies, their inner closeness embraced by kissing, pulling both mouth off heart, sucking once at much suction found everything there, sharing heartbeat, soul gasping, feeling trapped. Stillness spent deeply in euphoria, moments running away as ecstasy retreated to moments, breathing which became so loving to same senses, waking consciousness where thought embraced thoughts before back. Joining other pleasures too, rushing as warm mass cuddling lost its flavor, drinking filled only thing, life of never starting, drinking as fire ignited inside in order. Then every so their presence merged gently and touched deeply, forming both a fine perfume, all manner gone was memory kiss. Vixen Hang awoke from night's sluggish wakening, her skin melting, their moments moving upward along flowing wind, body sensitized finally now from another union taken, time enough, our wet snagged wet rings and fast drag made pace, having joined his feet below, running back, breathing, going light, smelling depthsement, walking backwards, waking, knowing, being watched, an intense deep hurt, making out, and breath became the long embrace too, running, watching himself, kissing their breaths, now we can't be dead. Smiling, touching, knowing when her mouth had joined finally, skin slippery full but we only rest found to eyes going wet, wanting, lips filling were sore, eyes again watching nothing, sleep turning, holding long soft shoulders, strong muscular limbs, skin burn in motion, everything burned, sat breathing cold, wanting, felt warmth soon, breath falling, heart beating as a distant future reached back, letting breath, all thoughts fled, meeting skin, and was too late, then she was gone. Julie stood in the kitchen, looking out the window. Richard was sitting at the table, reading something on his tablet. Their parents were sitting on the couch, talking quietly. She wanted to go outside and play, but she knew her parents wouldn't let her. She didn't care though. She was bored, and she had no idea why they hadn't let her play outside. She looked down at herself, noticing that her clothes had gotten messed up while she was playing in the pool. She was wearing a pink tank top with a pair of blue shorts. The shirt was covered in dried mud and grass stains, and she was pretty sure her shorts were missing a button or two, but she couldn't remember when that happened. It was probably the same reason her shirt was covered in mud. Her feet were dirty, too. They were covered in dirt and grass clippings. She didn't mind getting messy like that. If she did, she would have stayed inside where it was clean. Just then, the doorbell rang. They had forgotten to buy groceries. Julie hurried over to the door. "That's probably my new neighbors," she said. Richard nodded. He walked over to the front door and opened it. Stanley was standing there. He was dressed in a dark-colored polo shirt and khaki pants. "Hello," Stanley said. "I'm Stanley." Julie smiled, and she held out her hand. Stanley took it. "It's nice to meet you," she said. "My name is Julie." She gave him a quick hug, then stepped back. "Come in," Richard said. "We'll get the bags." They led Stanley inside. His eyes went wide as he saw the house, especially the kitchen. "I've never seen anything like that," he said. The kids followed him into the kitchen, where Richard put away the groceries. "You're not from around here, are you?" Julie asked. Stanley shook his head. "No, I'm from somewhere else," he replied. A few seconds later, their parents arrived. They brought Stanley upstairs, where they showed him to his room. "There's a bathroom across the hall," their father said. "If you need anything, just press the button next to the door, and someone will come take care of it for you." He handed Stanley a remote control. "This is your key to the house," he explained. "You can use it whenever you want." Stanley nodded. He turned to Julie. "Thank you so much for inviting me to stay with you," he said. "I really appreciate it." Julie shrugged. "It was nothing," she said. "We don't have any friends right now anyway." She went back downstairs, where her mother was cleaning up the kitchen. "Mom, do you think I could go outside and play?" she asked. Her mom glanced at the clock. "Well, we should probably let Stanley settle in first," she said. "What about you, Dad?" she asked. "Can I go play outside, or am I still grounded?" Richard hesitated. "Yes, you can go play outside," he finally said. Julie smiled. "Thank you," she said. "But I don't think I can find my shoes." She pointed to the pile of shoes under the dining room table. "I guess I'll have to wear them until I can find some other ones," she added. "Then I'll be able to go outside." Richard walked down the stairs after Julie returned from outside. "Did you have fun?" he asked. Julie nodded. "Yeah," she answered. "I played with Stanley. You know, the boy that moved in upstairs. We went for a walk together. Then we came back here, and he told me all kinds of stories about the town." "What kind of stories?" he asked. "About how the people who live here used to be normal," she said. "And about how you had to work for everything you got, instead of taking it for granted." Richard nodded. "That's true," he agreed. "Now, do you want to watch TV or something?" Julie shook her head. "Do you know what I'd really like to do?" she asked. "I was thinking about going outside again. But this time, I thought maybe I could go look for one of those little animals that lives in the forest." "You mean deer?" Richard asked. Julie nodded. "I watched a movie once that was set in a place like that," she said. "The guy in the movie wanted to find a baby deer because it reminded him of his dead father. So, I was wondering if I might be able to find one, too." "Okay, well, I guess we'll see," her dad said. "You can give me a call if you find anything interesting." Julie smiled and headed up to her room, where she found her shoes. She put them on, then left the house and stepped outside. As she wandered through the woods, she kept looking behind her, hoping to see a deer. "Maybe I'll find one," she mumbled. She continued walking for several minutes, but she didn't see anything. After a while, she decided to try the game again. Maybe it would work better this time. Julie closed her eyes and concentrated. She pictured the little animal hiding in the forest, then reached out with her mind. As she did, she suddenly heard a voice inside her head. "Whoa! Where am I?" Julie blinked. "Huh?" she asked aloud. "Where am I?" She opened her eyes and looked around. "Oh," she said. "I don't know. I must have fallen asleep." She stood up straight and started walking again, but she couldn't help noticing that there were no trees anywhere near her. Instead, she saw a big, open field stretching out in front of her. It was covered with golden grass and dotted with large rocks. Just as Julie took another step forward, a figure appeared in the distance. It was a small man wearing an orange t-shirt and jeans. He had brown hair and a blue backpack. "Hi, there," he called. "Do you know where you are?" "I'm pretty sure I don't," Julie said. "Really?" the man asked. "Are you sure?" "Because I do." He held up 2 fingers. "2 places," he said. "This is the place where you fell asleep." Julie nodded. "And the other place?" she asked. "Is that somewhere else?" The man shrugged. "I guess," he said. "But I have no idea where it is." Julie frowned. "How can you be sure about that?" she asked. "Isn't it possible you're wrong?" The man shook his head. "I'm not," he insisted. "I've been everywhere and seen everything. And I can tell when someone isn't telling the truth. So, I know you're right." He paused and gave Julie a funny look. "It doesn't matter anyway," he finally said. "Because you aren't supposed to be here. If you stay, your mom will get very angry. So, please, just leave." Julie nodded. "Okay," she said. "Thanks." She turned away and started walking toward the edge of the field. Then, before she reached the end, she stopped and turned back. "Wait," she said. "Can you show me how to get back home?" The man frowned. "I already tried that," he said. "But I don't know how to do it again. This is the only way I can get back to my own world." He pointed at the sky. "Right now, we are both standing on top of our worlds," he explained. "And they are connected by a thin, invisible thread. That's why you can see all these stars. They are floating over us, just like I am." Julie nodded. "So, how do I get off this planet?" she asked. "Well, you need to reach out and grab hold of that thread," the man said. "Then, You can pull yourself up onto it, and you'll be able to go home." Julie smiled. She knew exactly what she needed to do. "Okay," she said. "Let's do it." She walked across the field until she came to the edge. Then, she reached out and grabbed the thin strand of light. "Got it," she shouted. She pulled herself up onto the line, and she felt her body begin to float upward. "Whoa!" Julie exclaimed. That was fun. Soon, she reached the top of the universe, and she looked down at her family's backyard. "Bye, guys," she called. "See you soon." She waved and disappeared. "Where'd she go?" Stanley asked. "It looks like she's gone home," I said. "Home?" he repeated. "Like, real home?" "Yes," I replied. "She went to visit her parents." I paused and thought for a moment. "Now, let me ask you something," I said. "Did you ever talk to her about what happened last night?" "No," he answered. "We didn't really have time." "I understand," I said. "But if you want to find out who killed your sister, you need to talk to her. You know that, right?" "Yeah, but..." "Look," I interrupted. "You're going to have to trust me, okay?" Stanley sighed. "Fine," he grumbled. "Good," I said. "Now, where would you think she might be?" "Probably still at the hospital," he muttered. "Or maybe at work." "Those are good answers," I assured him. "If she's at the hospital, I can probably track her there with my phone. But I've got an even better idea." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small, silver key. "What's that?" Stanley asked. "A key," I replied. "Julie gave it to me a few days ago, so I could use it to unlock her locker at school." "Why would she give you a key to her lockers?" "Because she wanted to make sure I'd always be able to find her," I explained. "She knew I was going to ask her to help us solve your sister's murder." I held up the ring of keys. "Now, I think the odds are pretty high that she went to one of those 3 places," I said. "So, which do you think it is?" Stanley stared at me for a moment. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "I don't know." "That's okay," I reassured him. "I do." I handed the key ring to Stanley, and he took it in his hand. "Which one is it?" he asked. He looked back and forth at the 3 keys, and then he held up a finger. "This one," he said, pointing at the 3rd key. "Her locker is over here." "Okay," I agreed. "Then, let's go find your mom." Stanley nodded, and he followed me across the field. We were halfway there when the sun suddenly started to set behind us. "Hey, wait up," she shouted, running toward us. "Mom!" Stanley exclaimed. I smiled as Julie ran straight into my arms. "You're home," I said. "We're so glad you're okay." "Me too," she replied. As I embraced her, I noticed she had a bandage on her forehead. "Are you hurt?" I asked. "No," she said. "It's nothing important." After a moment of silence, Julie stepped away from me and turned to her brother. "Come with me," she told him. "Okay," he said. She led him across the field, and we watched them go. "They are such a cute couple," I said. "They are," Julie agreed. "I wish things could have been different." "Yeah," I said. "Me too." For a moment, we stood there and watched them walk away together. "It's okay," I said. "I'll figure out how to save her." Julie nodded, and she started walking away. "Wait," I called. She stopped, and we both looked at each other. "I owe you an apology," I said. "You do?" she asked. "Well, you were right all along about the murderer being here," I said. "And I did lie to you about it." "You did?" she asked. "Why?" "Well, I was afraid for your safety," I explained. "But now that I know you're safe, I can tell you the truth. The killer isn't human." "What?" she blurted out. "I know," I said. "Your mom thought so, too. And the reason why I was able to figure that out is because I'm a wizard. Remember?" "Right," she said. "So, the murderer is a wizard, too," I explained. "The only thing is, wizards don't just kill people. They take their powers." "Wow," she said. "That's why they are so dangerous," I reminded her. "If the killer has taken Julie's powers, then whoever she becomes won't be like her." "But she's not going to be herself anymore," Julie said. "She's never going to be able to use magic again." "That's the thing," I replied. "Wizards do it to themselves. They don't need another person to do it for them." "But how do you save her?" Julie asked. "I'm still working on that part," I admitted. My phone rang, and my heart skipped a beat. It was the number I was looking for. "Hello," I said. "Hi, Dad," came a familiar voice. For a second, I froze. "Is it really you?" I asked. "You're okay?" "I'm alive, Alex." "That's all that matters," he replied. "So, what happened?" I asked. "Where are you? Have you seen Mom?" "I'm not entirely sure where I am at the moment," Dad said. "I was in the middle of something when I got a call from a friend in New York." "New York?" I repeated. "What are you doing in New York?" "We were following up on some leads," he answered. "But that was before everything went crazy." "Do you know anything about Mom?" I asked. "Did you see her?" "I've been thinking about asking you that same question," Dad told me. "I'm sorry, Alex. I don't have any answers for you." "Okay," I said. "Well, I guess I should go now." "Alex, you shouldn't be alone right now," he insisted. "Not after everything that's happened. You need someone by your side." "I know," I said. "But the longer I stay here, the more likely it is that the murderer will find me." "I agree," he said. "But I don't want you running out into the streets by yourself." "I know," I told him. "I promise I'll be careful." "Please come back home soon," he urged. "You're all I have left of my family now." I felt my chest tighten up, and I took a deep breath. "I love you, Dad," I said. "I always will." "I love you too," Dad replied. "Good luck, son." "Tell Mom I said hello." There was a long pause, and then he broke the connection. He hung up on me, I whispered. "I guess he doesn't trust me anymore." "Don't let it bother you," Julie said. "It bothers me," I insisted. "I should have been there for him. I could have protected them both." "You tried," she pointed out. "You're their only hope, Alex." "But what if the killer comes for them while I'm gone?" I asked. "They won't be able to protect themselves." "Then your job is to protect the other humans," she said. "I think you already figured that out on your own." I looked at her, and she smiled. "That's why you're going to have to fight hard, Alex," she said. Because you owe it to them. My phone rang, and I answered it without looking at the screen. Hello, I said. Mr. Stanley, a man on the other end of the line said. This is Detective Ramirez. Are you free right now? Yes, Detective, I answered. How may I help you? Are you aware of a wizard named Alex Winthrop? He asked. His mother was murdered a few days ago. She worked as a waitress at that diner you own, correct? Yes, I'm pretty well acquainted with his mother, I said. In fact, I knew Julie's grandmother, too. Do you know of a Mr. Stanley who used to live in New York City? He continued. I believe he was a teacher at the school I went to, I answered. And is he the reason you're traveling to New York City now? He is, I confirmed. What was this Mr. Stanley like? He asked. Anything you can tell us would be helpful. My father is one of the most brilliant wizards of our time, I told him. He taught me everything I know about magic, just like he did with my mother. Would you say he has a tendency to get involved in the affairs of witches and wizards? Ramirez asked. He does, I answered. Sometimes he even helps them out, though. And what do you think he's doing right now? Ramirez asked. Is he trying to solve his wife's murder, perhaps? It seems to me like he's on his way to try and find out what happened to her, I explained. I'm sure he wants justice for her, just like the rest of us. I looked down at my hands, which were shaking slightly. I haven't told him everything yet, I admitted. But eventually he'll find out what really happened to his wife. Ramirez chuckled. The truth is that the police are still investigating Mrs. Stanley's death, he said. If Mr. Stanley really wants to help with the investigation, he'll have to tell us everything he knows. I know that, I told him. But I can't tell him until the killer is caught. So you want to keep this information from him, even though he could be risking his life? Ramirez demanded. That sounds like you don't care very much for him. Of course I care for him, I told him. He's the last person I'd want to see hurt. And you're the only person he can turn to right now, he added. That's the way the system works, Alex. You know that better than anyone. I'm sorry, I said. I have to go, he said. Call me if you remember anything else. I will, I assured him. I wish you luck with the case. Ramirez cut the connection, and I lowered the phone. Julie was waiting when I got back to my room. We need to talk, she said. About what? I asked. She ignored my question. Why didn't you tell the police about the spell? She asked. You were willing to do it for me, so why wouldn't you do it for your own father? I sat down on the bed. It's not that simple, I said. There's always a risk. And you couldn't tell him about it, she repeated. He won't listen if I tell him, I said. He doesn't believe in magic. That's an old-fashioned attitude, she said. If you love your father, you'll find a way to convince him. I can't do that, I told her. No matter how hard I try. She stood up. That means we need a plan, she said. You're going to have to convince him in a way that convinces him. We can use your powers to find some evidence that proves you're innocent, but in order to get him to understand, we have to figure out a way to make him realize you're innocent. And then we have to find a way to prove it to the police. I nodded. That's a good idea, I said. Good, she answered. I was hoping you'd say that. Now let's put it into action. The next morning I woke up early, showered, got dressed, and grabbed my magic bucket. When I got down to the kitchen, there was nobody around, so I figured I'd have breakfast by myself. I had just finished eating when the doorbell rang. I took my tray of clean dishes out to the sink and went back to the living room. The front door was open, so I walked out onto the porch. There was a woman standing outside. She looked familiar. She smiled at me as I opened the door. "Alex, hello," she said. "I'm glad you remembered me." I shook my head. "Jillian?" I asked. "What are you doing here? What time is it?" "I've been watching the house for days now," she replied. "I knew I recognized you from the moment you showed up." I looked at my watch. It was almost noon. "Are you all right?" I asked. "I'm perfect," she said. "I know why you're here, Alex. If you'd just come out and tell me why you're here, I would have told you everything." "You mean you haven't seen him?" I asked. She shook her head. "Not once," she said. "I'm sure he's fine. He wouldn't leave if he didn't have to." She held out her hand. "Come inside," she said. "You should call him first," I told her. "I already did," she replied. "He's expecting me to show up. He told me to take you to a safe place." I nodded. "All right," I said. "Let's go." I led her into the garage. "How did you know where I was staying?" I asked. "You don't know where I live." She shook her head. "Do you have any idea what you're getting involved with?" she asked. "What are you talking about?" I asked. She hesitated before answering. "I found the spell the killer used on Mrs. Rittenhouse's husband," she said. "I didn't have time to find out where the murder happened, or who did it. I did some research, though. I knew I was right the moment I saw the spell, and when I told Stanley, he realized what it was too." "You know the killer's name?" I asked. "No," she said. "I don't think we do. But I think we'll figure it out soon enough." "Why did you tell me?" I asked. She shrugged. "I thought it would be safer to have you on our side," she said. "Besides, I like you, Alex. You're one of the few people I've ever met who isn't afraid of magic." She paused. "And I guess there's something else," she added. "I also wanted to see your face when you learned that I am a sorceress." I laughed. "You don't have to lie to me," she said. "I already know you're a wizard." I nodded. "Yes," I said. "But I never thought you were a sorceress." She smiled. "That's because you only see half of me," she said. "You know I like to dress up in fancy clothes and jewelry, and put on airs. That's not real me. I'm a sorceress. There's only one person who knows that, and I want to keep it that way." "How is that different from being a sorceress?" I asked. "There are a lot of people who practice magic," she explained. "They may not be powerful sorceresses, but they still have some ability. I can sense how much power they have through their magic, and I can work with them, but that's it." "Then what are you?" I asked. She laughed. "I'm just a normal person," she said. "A pretty face that people tend to trust. I'm not a witch. I'm a sorceress, and I like it that way. If I was really a witch, I wouldn't have been able to talk to you." "What happened to Mrs. Rittenhouse's husband?" I asked. It was a very powerful curse, she said. He probably died instantly. She paused. The spell took his soul, Alex, she said. I doubt he was conscious at the end. I think he suffered a little. I felt sick. What kind of curse was it? I asked. She shrugged. I don't know, she said. I wasn't there when he did it. Where were you? I asked. She paused again. I was at the mall, she said. Stanley wanted me to go shopping, and I needed a break from the office. I went to the mall, but then I couldn't get Stanley off my mind. I kept thinking about Mrs. Rittenhouse's murder, and Stanley's involvement. I went to his shop, and when I got there, I found him with the body. She shook her head. When I saw what he was doing, I knew I had to stop him. He had killed Mrs. Rittenhouse, and he was going to kill more people. So I cast a spell to take away his magic. Did he see you? I asked. She shook her head. I was invisible, she explained. I slipped inside the shop, but he still didn't notice me. I cast a spell, and the next thing I knew, I was outside the store. I waited until he came out with another victim, and I followed him. She paused. I'm glad you were there, she said. If I hadn't been there, Stanley might have hurt you. Why? I asked. She smiled. Because you were the only chance I had to stop him, she said. When you ran into the shop, it distracted him. It gave me a chance to catch up with him, cast my spell, and then escape. She looked down. I couldn't save him, she said. It was too late. The curse had already taken his magic, and his will to live. Did you know the person who cursed him? I asked. She shook her head. No, she replied. As far as I know, he doesn't even exist. She paused. Do you believe me, Alex? She asked. I shrugged. I do, I said. Her eyes widened. Really? She asked. Yeah, I answered. I told you I trusted you, she said. You don't have to tell me anything if you don't want to. You can keep secrets from me if you want to, but the truth is, I won't force you. She leaned forward and wrapped her arms around me. Alex, she said. Thank you. Thank you for believing me. She pulled back, and our faces were inches apart. She looked into my eyes. I like you, she said. I really do. And I like what I see when I look at you. I'm attracted to you. I find you attractive. More than anyone I've ever met. I feel the same way, I said. I'm glad we both feel this way. She paused, and her eyes became distant. But she continued. What you don't understand is that you're special, Alex. And I can't tell you why. It's more than just the way you look, or what we did last night. You're special, and I don't want you to forget that. I want you to hold on to it. Because I need you to promise me something. Promise me you'll never forget that you are special. I can't make that promise, I said. She smiled. Of course you can't, she said. Because you don't know the reason yet. But I do. And maybe I can help you figure it out. She sat back, and put her hand over my chest. Her palm was warm. I want to tell you the story of my life, she said. I think it will explain why I'm so different from everyone else. Maybe it will give you a better understanding of me. She took a breath. Let me start with the beginning, she said. My name is Emma. My mother was a witch and my father was a demon, and they weren't married at the time. When I was born, they tried to stop each other. They wanted me for themselves. They were enemies, and they fought for my soul. She paused. They killed each other in front of me, she continued. And then, just like that, I became the heir to two powerful families. I belonged to both human and demon worlds. I was destined to do great things. She took a deep breath, and her lips formed a tight line. I don't remember much about growing up, she said. The only thing I have left of my parents are their memories. Their love. And everything I know about them comes from those memories. She paused. My mother taught me how to use magic, she continued. She also showed me how to control my power. And I learned how to use the powers of the demons I was descended from. She paused again. I grew up alone, she said. I never had a family. There was no one to protect me. No one to guide me through my childhood. I had to learn all the things I needed to survive by myself. She continued, staring straight ahead. At a young age, I used my magic to create a bodyguard, she said. A monster who would always be with me. A protector. I called him Stanley. She paused. I began to dream of a future, she said. One where I could finally leave the demon world behind. I dreamed of living freely in a place where everyone accepted me. Where I would have the freedom to choose my own destiny. She paused again. I realized I couldn't do any of that until I was older, she said. So I went looking for someone who might take me under his wing. I searched for an adult, a mentor, someone I could trust. She continued, staring straight ahead. Eventually, I found him, she said. He was kind, and gentle, and patient. He understood what I was going through. He helped me become stronger. She paused. His name was Alistair, she said. He was a knight in training. One day, he offered to train me. She paused. That was the best day of my life, she said. Her voice cracked. After that, I spent most of my free time practicing martial arts with him, she said. We trained together every day. We traveled to many places. Places in Europe, and Asia, and Africa. I saw the wonders of the world. She paused again. Then one day, while we were traveling, she continued. Alistair told me a secret. She paused. He said he loved me, she said. She started crying. He said he wanted to marry me, she continued. He said we would live happily ever after. She paused. I didn't believe him, she said. I knew it wasn't true. But I was too afraid to say anything to him, because if he left me, I thought I would die. She paused again. When we got back home, she said, I waited for him to come see me. But he never did. In fact, he never even came inside my room. She paused. I was furious, she said. I couldn't understand why he wouldn't talk to me. Why he would abandon me like this. The worst part was that I still missed him. I loved him. She paused. It happened again a few months later, she said. This time, he said the same thing. That he loved me. It didn't make sense. I felt betrayed. She paused. But I didn't want to hurt his feelings, she said. So I pretended to be happy when he said those words. I didn't want to lose him. She paused. My heart broke all over again, she said. She sniffled. I fell into a deep depression, she said. I stopped doing my homework. I started skipping classes. She paused. One day, I walked out of my house, she said. I was so angry at myself. I hated myself for being weak, for not standing up for myself. She sniffed. I realized that I was a coward, she said. So I decided to change my life. I vowed to never let anyone treat me badly again. I decided to start fighting back. She paused. I began searching for ways to improve myself, she said. I read books, and watched videos, and practiced every day. I studied martial arts, and boxing, and karate, and jiu-jitsu. I trained with swords, knives, sticks, maces, and guns. She paused. I learned how to fight with my bare hands, she said. How to punch, kick, grapple, and throw. How to defend against punches, kicks, throws, grabs, and chokes. She paused. She had paused so long she had forgotten where she was in her story. Anyway, I said. Where were you going with all this? Oh, she said. Right. So I trained in martial arts for years, she said. And I got really strong. Really fast. She paused. I mean, I'm still not as strong as some people, she said. But I've gotten pretty good. She paused. Anyway, she said. After I became stronger, I started training in new ways, she said. I began experimenting with different types of combat, like ninjutsu, and jujutsu, and sambo. She paused. The reason I'm telling you all this is because, she said, you're my first real fight. She paused. I can't wait to win, she said. I don't care about the money. I just want to prove that I'm better than you. She paused. That's why I'm doing this, she said. And that's why I'll win. She paused. Are there any more questions? No, I said, bored of how long she had been pausing. Let's just get this fight over with. Okay, she said. Then I guess we should begin. She stood up and began walking towards me. I waited for her to attack. I waited. And waited. Finally, I gave up waiting. I made a fist and punched her in the face. She recoiled. Her eyes went wide. For a moment, she looked like she might cry. Then, she smiled. Come on, she said. I thought you were a lot stronger than that. She slapped my hand away. I tried punching her again. She blocked it effortless. Ha, she laughed. What are you doing? You can't hit me. Look at us. We're both girls. She moved away from me. I followed her. She circled around behind me. She grabbed my wrists. I struggled against her grip. She pushed me down onto the ground. Look, she said. I know you're scared, she said. We're both girls. But you can't let your fear control you. If you do, you won't last 5 minutes in the ring. She pulled me to my feet. Come on, she said. Let's go. She led me through the crowd to the arena. Okay, she said. Here we go. She opened the door to the cage. She shoved me inside. Good luck, she said. She closed the door. I sat in silence, staring into the darkness of my cell. I knew she would come after me. I couldn't escape. I wouldn't have escaped even if I could. She wasn't my type. Besides, I liked her too much. I didn't want to hurt her. I wanted to protect her. I didn't want her to get hurt. If I fought her, she'd be hurt. I couldn't let her get hurt. So I waited. I waited until she was ready. I waited until she was willing to fight. I waited until she was confident in herself. I waited until she was brave enough to take a chance. I waited until she was able to trust me. I waited until she believed that I would never hurt her. I waited until she trusted that I would always protect her. I waited until she came after me. And then I let her win. A few minutes later, I heard a knock at the door. I opened it to find her standing there. "Hi," she said. "Hey," I said. "Would you mind if I stayed here tonight?" she asked. "I feel uncomfortable sleeping alone." "Sure," I said. "Thanks for coming by." I unlocked the door and let her inside. I closed the door behind her. I turned off the light. I climbed into bed beside her. "You don't have to sleep on the couch," I said. "It's okay if you want to stay here." She snuggled up against me. I hugged her tightly. I fell asleep with her in my arms. The next morning, I woke up to her smiling at me. "Morning," she said. "How did you sleep?" "Fine," I said. "Thank you for staying." "My pleasure," she said. "Do you want breakfast?" "Yes, please," I said. She cooked me bacon, eggs, and pancakes. She brought me coffee. "You're so nice," she said. "I'm glad you stayed." I smiled back. "What happened to you yesterday?" she asked. "Nothing," I said. "I just got sick." "I'm sorry," she said. "I wish I'd known. I'd have taken care of you." "Don't worry about it," I said. "I'm fine now." "Did you tell anyone what happened?" she asked. "Not yet," I said. "Why?" "I think it would be best if you told your parents," she said. "They need to know that something like this could happen. They should know how dangerous it is to go out alone. I don't want them to die because they are stupid." "I agree," I said. "But I'm not sure how to tell them." "Just say you ran into trouble," she said. "That's all you really need to tell them. As far as they are concerned, it was an accident. Say you fell or something." "All right," I said. "I'll try to talk to them when they get home." "Good," she said. "Now, I'd better get going. I've got things to do today." "Sure," I said. "Take care of yourself." She kissed me goodbye. "Bye," I said. I watched her walk away. I sighed. I started making myself breakfast. I had a lot of thinking to do. I didn't want to make the same mistake twice. I wanted to make sure I was safe. I pulled out my phone and called my parents. "Hello," my mother answered. "Mom, it's me," I said. "Are you still at work?" "Yeah," she said. "I'm just sitting down for lunch." "Is Dad around?" I asked. "He's at the office," she said. "What's wrong?" "I'm fine," I said. "Everything's okay." "I can hear that everything isn't fine," she said. "What's going on? What did you run into?" "I don't think you really want to know," I said. "Please, Mom. Just send Dad. He needs to come home and see what happened to me." "Okay," she said. "I'll call him and tell him to hurry." I sat there waiting for his arrival. I tried to figure out what to say. Finally, he walked through the door. "Hi honey," my mom said. "I hope you're feeling better." "I'm fine," I said. "I just wanted to let you know about yesterday." "Oh dear," she said. "Where are your wounds?" "They are gone," I said. "Well, I guess that's good," she said. "I need to apologize," I said. "I was careless and I endangered your lives." "It's okay, sweetie," she said. "Accidents happen. I promise from now on to be more careful," I said. "I won't go anywhere without telling you first." "All right," she said. "Now, how did you hurt yourself yesterday?" "I got lost," I said. "I was trying to find the library, but I ended up somewhere else." "How did you get lost?" she asked. "I followed a road," I said. "It wasn't a very good idea." "What street were you on?" she asked. "The one by the mall," I said. "That's a terrible place to get lost," she said. "Did you stay with the person who took you?" "No," I said. "I couldn't find him again." "And he just left you there?" she asked. "I don't think he meant to," I said. "I think he was just in a hurry. He said he had to meet someone." "Were you able to describe him?" she asked. "Not really," I said. "He was wearing a mask." "A mask?" she said. "You mean like a Halloween mask?" "Yes," I said. "Like a clown mask." "I don't think we've ever had any trouble with anyone dressed like that," she said. "I don't think so either," I said. "Maybe he moved here recently." "Do you remember the color of his hair?" she asked. "No," I said. "I don't even know if it was blonde or brown. It was hard to see because the light was behind him. I could only see the side of his face." "Well, keep your eyes open," she said. "If anything happens, you call us right away. Don't worry about offending us. We'll love you no matter what." "Thanks, Mom," I said. "We'll talk later," she said. I ate dinner alone. I made myself a sandwich. I sat in front of the television. I turned it on. There was nothing on. I flipped channels. There was still nothing on. I looked at my phone. I hadn't heard from my parents all day. I called them. "Hello," my dad answered. "Dad," I said. "I'm sorry for worrying you." "Don't worry about it," he said. "I'm just glad you're all right." "Are you sure?" I asked. "Because I don't feel all right." "I know you don't," he said. "But it's okay. You'll be fine." "Now, what happened today?" "I went to the library," I said. "I was looking for something to read. I got lost." "I told you not to go there," he said. "I know," I said. "I probably shouldn't have gone there. But I didn't mean to get lost." "So, you finally found your way back?" he asked. "Sort of," I said. "I found my way outside, but I can't remember how I got back inside." "Really? So, you must be feeling better," he said. "I don't know," I said. "My head hurts." "Well, try to get some sleep," he said. "I'll talk to you tomorrow." "Okay," I said. Night. I woke up the next morning. I felt groggy. I got out of bed. I walked into the kitchen. I saw my mom. She was standing at the sink. She looked worried. "Good morning," she said. "Morning," I said. "How are you feeling?" she asked. Bad, I said. This headache is killing me. Just lay down for a while, she said. I'll make you some breakfast. Sounds good, I said. Thank you. I knew you wouldn't want to eat in front of everyone, she said. I thought you'd rather just relax in your room. Thanks, I said. I feel much better now. Good, she said. Now, let me finish making breakfast and then we can talk. Sounds good, I said. I watched her as she cooked. I tried to memorize everything about her. Her long black hair. The way it bounced when she moved. I watched her lips. They were full and soft. I wondered if they tasted like candy. I wondered what she'd look like naked. I tried to picture it in my mind. It was difficult. My thoughts kept wandering. I closed my eyes. I imagined her lying next to me. I could feel her warm breath on my neck. I could smell the scent of her perfume. I opened my eyes. I saw her staring at me. What are you doing? She asked. You need to stop daydreaming and eat your breakfast. Sorry, I said. I started eating. I finished my food. I did not say another word. After I finished eating, I went upstairs to my bedroom. I took off my clothes. I got into the shower. I washed myself. I shaved. I stared at myself in the mirror. I saw the changes. I was taller than before. I had more muscle. And my skin was darker. I looked older, too. I couldn't believe it. I left the bathroom. I put on my pajamas. I laid down on my bed. I closed my eyes. I pictured my mother. I pictured my father. I imagined them both naked. Then I stopped. What the hell was that about? Anyway, I was tired. I fell asleep. When I woke up, I heard someone knocking on my door. I sat up. I grabbed my robe. I threw open the door. My mother stood there. She smiled. Hi, she said. I came by to see how you were feeling. I'm fine, I said. Just a little sore. That's good, she said. We both smiled. Do you mind if I come in? She asked. Not at all, I said. She entered. Did you sleep well? She asked. Yes, I said. Very well. Good, she said. I'm glad. I've been so worried about you. It's nice to hear you're better. Thanks, I said. She sat down on the edge of my bed. I know this might sound crazy, she said. But would you mind coming downstairs with me for a minute? I'd really like to talk to you alone. Sure, I said. We walked downstairs together. Why do you want to talk to me alone? I asked. Well, because there are some things I'd like to tell you, she said. I think you deserve to know the truth. Okay, I said. She led me into the living room. Please sit down, she said. I sat down on the couch. First of all, she began, I never meant to hurt you or your father. You have to understand that. I don't care, I said. I know, she said. But I didn't mean to hurt anyone. I swear it. I only did it to help us. What do you mean? I asked. When I was a teenager, I experimented with drugs, she said. I already know that, I said. No, she said. You don't understand. That experiment almost killed me. What are you talking about? I asked. I used to work in an illegal lab, she explained. It was a secret operation. We made designer drugs. Ones that no one else could make. They were very powerful and highly addictive. Well, I was working there as a chemist. One of my jobs was to test the drugs on animals. I knew I wasn't supposed to do it, but I was desperate. My life was going downhill fast. I needed money. So I went ahead and tested the drugs on animals. But instead of testing it on rats, I decided to test it on people. I figured it was okay because the experiments had already been approved by a government panel. I thought I was safe. I took the drug on myself. I waited for the effects to kick in. I was high for days. It was amazing. I felt incredible. I hadn't felt that good since before my husband died. So what happened next? I asked. Nothing good, she said. The drugs messed with my brain. I lost my memory. I couldn't remember anything. And then, when I finally remembered who I was, I realized I wanted to forget everything again. How long ago was this? I asked. A few years, she said. But how did you end up here? I asked. I was a prisoner at a mental hospital, she said. They tried to get me to stop taking those drugs, but I didn't listen. I just kept using them. I wanted to feel that way forever. Eventually, the doctors told me I had to be sent somewhere else. They gave me a new identity. Where is that? I asked. I don't remember, she said. But where are we now? I asked. I don't know, she said. But I want to go home. To where? I asked. Anywhere, she said. Back to my old life. Back to my old job. Back to my old friends. I'm tired of being locked away. I need to be free. Will you take me back with you? I asked. Of course, she said. Thank you, I said. Come on, she said. Let's get out of here. Okay, I said. She stood up. Wait. I shouted. You can't leave without doing something first. What? She asked. I reached under my pillow. I pulled out the plastic bag. This is yours, I said. I found it last night. When I came in from the bathroom. Are you sure? She asked. Yeah, I said. I saw you put it there. Oh, she said. That explains why you were looking for it earlier. Yes, I said. And I also found this, I said, showing her the ring. What's that? She asked. It's a wedding band, I said. It belonged to your husband? My husband? She asked. Yes, I said. She looked down at the ring. She lifted off the plastic bag and slipped it on. Doesn't it fit? I asked. She nodded. It does, she said. That's strange. Why? I asked. Because it doesn't belong to me, she said. What do you mean? I asked. I bought it today, she said. At the market. I went to buy some groceries. I wore it all day, just like this. When I got back home, I noticed it was missing. Could you have lost it? I asked. Maybe, she said. But I don't think so. I would have remembered. Then where is it? I asked. I don't know, she said. But I'll find it. Do you want me to help you look for it? I asked. No, she said. You should go. You can't stay here any longer. This place isn't safe. There's nowhere else for me to go, I said. I'm sorry, she said. But I can't let you leave. It wouldn't be right. But why not? I asked. Because you're the one who broke into my apartment, she said. I didn't break in, I said. I sneaked in while you were asleep. Well, even if that were true, it doesn't change the fact that you shouldn't be here, she said. But I didn't do anything wrong, I said. Not yet, she said. But you will. The police are looking for you. Police? I asked. Yes, she said. They are going to come for you. Is that what happened to my sister? I asked. Did the police come for her too? Yes, she said. Your sister is dead. Dead? I asked. How could she be dead? I haven't heard anything about her being killed. That's because she never existed, she said. She is not real. What do you mean? I asked. She's an imaginary person, she said. She's a figment of your imagination. Like the person in the bed beside you. Who are you talking about? I asked. The man in the other bed, she said. He's your best friend? Is he? I asked. Of course he is, she said. Isn't that obvious by now? I guess so, I said. Good, she said. Now you see how easy it is to fool you. But don't worry. I won't tell them about you. Not until you're gone. Gone? I asked. What do you mean? I mean that after you've left, she said. I'll call the police. I'll tell them everything. They'll arrest you and lock you up again. And then they'll kill you. Kill me? I asked. Yes, she said. After they've killed you, I'll tell them everything. I'll tell them about your sister. I'll tell them about the ring I found. I'll tell them that you tried to steal it. That you broke into my apartment. And that you killed my husband. Killed him? I asked. What do you mean? I mean that you murdered him, she said. Don't try to deny it. I saw you with the knife. I saw you stab him in the chest. I even saw you shove his body through the window. I didn't kill anybody. I yelled. That's what you told the police last time, she said. And they believed you. Why should I believe anything you say now? You don't have to believe me, I said. I think I do, she said. Anyway, I'm only telling you this because I care about you. Because I love you. Love me? I asked. Yes, she said. I love you very much. But we hardly know each other, I said. Yes, but I know you better than anyone else does, she said. I know what you really are. What you really think. What am I? I asked. You're a monster, she said. A murderer. A killer. But I didn't kill anybody, I said. I was framed. I don't believe you, she said. I know the truth. I always knew what kind of person you were. But I never thought you'd go this far. I wasn't trying to kill anybody, I said. All I wanted to do was get away from them. They? She asked. Who did you run away from? My parents, I said. But you lived with your parents all your life, she said. Yes, I said. Until they killed my sister. Whose sister is that? She asked. My little sister, I said. She died when she fell out of the tree house. It was the day I came home from school. Oh, I'm so sorry, she said. I didn't know. It wasn't your fault, I said. There was nothing you could do about it. Yes, there was, she said. If you hadn't been such a bad brother, she wouldn't have fallen. What? I asked. Your sister would still be alive if you weren't such a bad brother, she said. You pushed her off the tree house. That was a story about a man named Stanley who worked for a company in a big building.